Have you ever been so certain you were alone, only to realize you weren't? It's the kind of realization that creeps up on you inch by inch until it consumes every corner of your mind. That's how it began for me. Not with a bang or a scream, but with something subtle. Faint sounds coming from the apartment above mine. I'd moved into the old brick building in downtown Chicago a month ago. The rent was manageable, and the vintage charm, a clawfoot tub, tall windows, and a creaky hardwood floor made it feel cozy. The landlord, Mr. Kramer, was an older man with a kind smile, and during my tour, he'd assured me the building was quiet. It's mostly long-term tenants, very little turnover, he'd said. For the first few weeks, that was true. The most noise I heard was the occasional honk from the street below or the faint hum of the neighbor's TV through the walls. But then, one night, I heard footsteps coming from the apartment directly above mine. At first, it didn't seem unusual. This was an old building and sounds carried easily. I assumed someone had moved in recently, even though I hadn't seen anyone coming or going. But as the nights went on, the noises grew stranger. The footsteps weren't hurried or scattered, like someone going about their day. Instead, they were slow, measured, like someone pacing in circles. Maybe it's just an insomniac, I told myself one night, as I lay awake at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling. The sound of heavy, deliberate steps echoed above me. Then came the dragging noise. It started faintly, like something being pulled across the floor, and grew louder as it moved. My heart raced as I strained to make sense of it. What could someone possibly be dragging at this hour? The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. On my way to work, I stopped by the landlord's office. "Morning, Mr. Kramer," I said, trying to sound casual. "Morning, Miss Carter. Everything all right?" he asked, peering at me over his glasses. "Yeah, it's just... I've been hearing noises from the apartment above me. Did someone move in recently?" He frowned, shaking his head. "No, that unit's been vacant for months. I'm planning to renovate it soon." I blinked. "You're sure? Because I've been hearing footsteps and dragging noises." Mr. Kramer chuckled, though it sounded uneasy. "Old building, Miss Carter. Sounds travel in strange ways. Might be coming from somewhere else." But I didn't believe him. That night, the noises returned, louder and more distinct than ever. At 1:30 a.m., I finally lost my patience. Wrapping myself in a robe, I grabbed my phone and marched upstairs. The hallway was dim, the flickering light bulbs casting shadows that seemed to stretch and curl like fingers. I knocked on the door of the upstairs apartment. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, even to me. I knocked again, louder this time. There was no answer. But just as I turned to leave, I heard something on the other side of the door, a faint, raspy whisper. "Who's there?" I froze. The voice was so quiet I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. "Hello? I'm your neighbor from downstairs. I keep hearing noises late at night," I said, my voice trembling. Silence. Then, the faintest sound of movement. A floorboard creaked. "Please, stop the noises. It's hard to sleep," I added, hoping to sound polite despite my nerves. But the voice didn't respond. Instead, the sound of footsteps began again, this time moving away from the door. Slow, deliberate, fading into the apartment's depths. I backed away, my heart pounding. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door and pushed a chair against it. That night, the noises didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder. The noises didn't stop. For the next few nights, they became a nightly ritual. Footsteps, dragging, whispers. Each time I heard them, they grew louder, more distinct, as if whatever was making them wanted me to hear. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, that Mr. Kramer was right, and the sounds were just the building settling or coming from another unit. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The turning point came one night when the whispers changed. They weren't muffled or distant anymore. They were clear, close. "Help! Me!" I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. I held my breath, straining to listen. The words came again, louder this time, as if the voice was right outside my door. "Help! Me! Please!" I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. Gripping my phone tightly, I tiptoed to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, bathed in the faint orange glow of the flickering light. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I marched back to Mr. Kramer's office, my nerves frayed. "Miss Carter," he greeted me with his usual kind smile, but I didn't have time for pleasantries. "Mr. Kramer, I'm serious. There's something in the apartment above mine. I heard a voice last night." His smile faltered. "A voice?" "Yes. It was saying, 'Help me.'" "It sounded like someone was in trouble," I said, my voice shaking. Mr. Kramer leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowing. "That apartment's been empty for 6 months. I've told you that." "But someone is in there," I insisted. He sighed and stood up, grabbing a ring of keys from his desk. "All right, I'll prove it to you. Let's go check it out." The walk up to the second floor felt like a march to my own execution. Mr. Kramer didn't seem fazed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was waiting for us behind that door. When we reached the apartment, he unlocked the door and pushed it open. The air inside was cold, much colder than the hallway. The apartment was dark, the curtains drawn tight over the windows. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the weak beam of light from the hallway. "See? Empty," Mr. Kramer said, gesturing to the barren space. But it didn't feel empty. The living room was bare, save for an old armchair in the corner. The floorboards creaked under our feet as we moved inside. I stayed close to the doorway, every instinct telling me not to go further. Then I saw it. In the far corner of the room, near the armchair, was a faint handprint on the wall. It wasn't made of paint or dust. It was black, like soot. "Mr. Kramer," I whispered, pointing. He turned, his eyes narrowing as he saw the handprint. "That's strange," he muttered. Before I could respond, we heard it. A soft creak, like someone shifting their weight. We both froze. "Is someone here?" Mr. Kramer called, his voice shaking slightly. Silence. Then, the dragging sound started again. It came from the next room, low and guttural, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Mr. Kramer's face paled. "I'll check it out," he said, though his voice was unsteady. "No!" I blurted out, grabbing his arm. "Let's just leave and call the police." But he shook his head. "It's probably just some vagrant who broke in. I'll handle it." Reluctantly, I followed him as he moved toward the sound. We entered the bedroom, and that's when the smell hit me. A sour, metallic stench that turned my stomach. The room was empty except for a mattress on the floor. On it was a pile of something that looked like ash. Above the mattress, scrawled on the wall in black, was a single word. Stay. We didn't stay. We left the apartment in a hurry, locking the door behind us. Mr. Kramer assured me he'd call the police, but his face was pale, his hands trembling as he fumbled with his keys. That night, the noises stopped. But the whispers didn't. The noises stopped after Mr. Kramer and I left the apartment, but the silence that followed was far worse. I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. The black handprint, the ash, the words scrawled on the wall. It felt like the apartment itself was trying to warn us. Mr. Kramer promised to call the police, but the next morning he brushed the whole thing off. "The officers said they didn't find anything unusual," he told me over the phone. "It's probably just vandals." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. And that night, my suspicions were confirmed. I was in bed trying to distract myself with a podcast when the whispers returned. "Stay, stay, stay." The voice was so faint it could have been the wind, but as it grew louder, I knew it wasn't. I yanked off my headphones, my heart racing. The voice was coming from above me, directly from the ceiling. Before I could think, there was a knock at my door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze. My apartment felt colder, the air heavy with dread. Gathering every ounce of courage, I crept toward the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I backed away, every instinct telling me to leave, but then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Come upstairs." My breath caught. My hands trembled as I stared at the message, unsure if I should call someone or run. But before I could decide, another text came through. "It's waiting for you." I didn't know why, but I felt compelled to go. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear. Either way, I found myself standing outside the door of the apartment upstairs once again. This time I didn't knock. I twisted the doorknob. It was unlocked. The air inside was colder than before, and the darkness seemed thicker, more oppressive. I stepped inside, my phone flashlight barely piercing the shadows. The living room was exactly as we'd left it, except for the chair. It was no longer in the corner. It had been moved to the center of the room, facing me. I swallowed hard, stepping closer. That's when I saw it. A figure sat in the chair, slumped forward, its face hidden in shadow. At first I thought it was a mannequin. Its skin was pale and waxy, and its clothes hung loose, tattered. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure's head snapped up. Its eyes weren't human. They were black, bottomless voids that seemed to pull the light from the room. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing jagged, uneven teeth. "Stay!" it hissed, its voice raspy and unnatural. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering. The shadows around the figure began to shift and twist, reaching out like tendrils. "Stay with me," it croaked, its voice echoing in my head. I turned and bolted, my feet barely carrying me down the stairs. I didn't stop until I was in my apartment, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I didn't sleep that night. The whispers continued, louder now, coming not just from above, but from all around me. The next morning, I went to Mr. Kramer's office to demand answers, but when I got there, I found it empty. The landlord wasn't just gone, his office looked like it hadn't been used in years. Dust covered the desk, and the calendar on the wall was from 2017. I ran back to my apartment, trying to make sense of what was happening. As I entered, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the wall above my bed, scrawled in black, was a single word: "Stay." And from the ceiling, the whispers began again.